The empty man. No, I mean the guy was empty. Literally empty. I struggled to comprehend what exactly the surgeon was trying to tell me. What, so he was missing a kidney already? No, he was missing everything already. Just a heart hanging from arteries in his empty fucking torso. He was clearly disturbed by what he had seen and ran his sleeve over his head to wipe away sweat. Oh, okay, right. Very funny, John. Yeah, empty. Nice one. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. Instead, he was staring himself down in the mirror. Look, no one understands what we just saw in there. It doesn't make any sense. He wasn't looking at me. Just be his nurse, okay? We'll put him somewhere else, find an empty room. We just need you to check on him, nothing strenuous. They're calling together a meeting with the heads, but it's not until tomorrow morning. I was a little confused. This joke seemed to be going more than a little too far, as I watched 3 people wheel the man away down the corridor. He was smiling, waving to people happily as he went past, even gave me a cheerful, "Hello." John, this is ridiculous. Look at the man. Do you expect me to believe he's got nothing in him? He splashed water onto his pale face and stripped his gloves from his hands, making a loud snap. Kelly, it doesn't matter if you believe me or not. Any moment now, Carlson is going to page you and tell you that you're looking after him for the night. I didn't have any major problem with looking after the man. It was a far easier shift than the one I'd been expecting. But we were understaffed, and I was confused as to why we were wasting our time on this one patient. All the same, when I did get the inevitable page from Dr. Carlson, I didn't waste any time in heading over to do my job. I was instructed that I'd be making routine checks every half hour and ensuring the man was comfortable. He was in oddly high spirits, considering he'd been informed of little other than that there had been some complications. He even stayed awake all night, sat up with a beaming smile on his face that only grew when he'd spot me coming back in. Mr. York, you may sleep if you wish. I can administer these checks either way. I told him several times, but he just waved his hand and gave a little pshaw. These checks were a little strange. Blood pressure and heart rate were fine, but his respiratory rate was what unnerved me. Normally, when you do a check for the respiratory rate, we tend not to tell the patients what we're doing, counting their breaths in our head while doing the blood pressure. That's what we'd normally do, but this patient I couldn't make out his breathing at all, no regular chest movements or audible passage of air. Only when I'd tell him I needed to check would he suddenly start heaving his shoulders up and down, his stomach inflating and deflating with each exhale, and making a loud each and every time. It was deep into the night, 3:30, when I went to administer the regular checks I'd been making since he'd been assigned to me. He gave me the same beaming grin as I entered, and I gave him my best comforting smile back. All right, Mr. York, you know the drill. I smiled and held my stethoscope up for him to see. He stared straight at me and lifted up his gown. Perfect. If only all patients were as good as you, huh? I gave him another smile, but he just continued to stare at me. It began to send a shiver down my spine. His eyes stared, but they didn't look alive. He didn't even blink. I looked down to his bare chest and moved to press my stethoscope to it. To my horror, as I watched, I could see the skin on his stomach bulge and stretch, several points of pressure sliding around the inside of his abdomen. And then, a something came pushing through, a singular, long, thin spear that struggled as it punctured him, bloodlessly. I screamed and leaped back as the other points came scratching through the hole that the first had formed, wiggling and pushing. I could see now that they each had joints from which they were writhing, 5 feet long. I scrambled my way backwards along the floor as his empty eyes and dead smile stayed fixed on me. The legs finally made it out to a degree they were happy with, and then gripped the sides of the bed, lifting the empty skin sack which had once been the man I knew as Mr. York into the air. The 8 spider-like appendages began to crawl across the room, tall enough that the empty dermal bag they had sprung from didn't even touch the ground. It paid no attention to me, instead searching carefully around the room, the human head still swiveling and smiling as it looked for an exit. It made its way to the door, and then on each writhing, razor-thin leg, it scampered down the hallway. I was given a month's leave, but I knew better than to insist about what I saw. I just kept my mouth shut and let the incident pass. Of course, had I lost a regular patient like this, there would have been an outrage. But I was simply forgotten in the hubbub of the empty man. Occasionally, though, we still hear stories from patients and staff who are in late. The odd tale of someone catching a glimpse of a thing zipping past a door or through a corridor. Weirder still is that, ever since it happened, blood donor bags just keep disappearing.